Hi, I'm Linda Szymanski, Head of Content for PBS Kids and a three-time attendee of the CMC. I've participated in some panels and various pitching events, and I found the CMC to be an excellent place to drink many cups of tea. The keynote I'll be talking about is 2018's keynote by Beeban Kidron. Now, I always enjoy the keynote addresses at the CMC, although as an American, I don't always recognize the keynoters. I was excited 2 years ago because I'd actually heard of Beeban Kidron, so I made sure to attend. And that was a great decision because it really stuck with me. I wasn't sure what to expect. I had learned from her bio that she was a baroness, as well as a filmmaker, and again, as an American, I don't know exactly what it means to be a member of the House of Lords, and I thought she must be quite wealthy and probably makes films on the side for fun. Needless to say, I was blown away by how smart, funny, and down-to-earth she was. She walked out to the podium in jeans and green sneakers, and I thought, wow, I'd want to do that. She's cool. And I enjoyed hearing about her career path through the film industry. She talked about female empowerment and the way things used to be for women in the film industry, which was not that good, and there weren't many of them. She told a great story about having to talk to Steven Spielberg when she needed to tell him that she was pregnant while making a film. She told another story about giving birth on the way home from filming To Wong Fu, and those were both great. But then the topic shifted, and I started to realize exactly why she was giving the keynote. Beeban Kidron is a children's rights campaigner. Her group, the Five Rights Foundation, is based on the idea that the digital environment wasn't meant for kids. It's an environment that's addictive for adults. How could kids transcend that? The concept of childhood doesn't exist in the online world. She questions, what are the rights of children in the digital universe? The exact right provocative questions to ask at CMC. And when a person uses their power to protect an audience of kids who can't protect themselves, it's inspiring, it's important. And she challenged us to be role models in our jobs. Use your power for good, make an impact. And she clearly is a role model for all of us.
What I learned from Eve was first, it's not enough for people to have a voice. We must also listen. Second, that those in charge do not always have our best interests in mind. And third, that stories matter. People need to identify with stories. People want to see their future selves. People need to feel that they are part of traditions that actually include them. In 1987, Jeanette Winterson published her novel, The Passion. It was and is a remarkable book, and it was the same year that my first feature film, Vroom, had been in the London Film Festival. And for those who are interested, it was also the first film of David Thewlis and Clive Owen, who I had hired, both straight out of drama school. And a few people had written to me and said, I really loved your film, I thought it was very refreshing, whatever they had to say. And in doing that, they had made me understand really early on in my career that creative people need support. When one creative person writes to you and says, well done, keep going, that is like a motor to keep going. So I rang Jeanette. I didn't know her, but we had a friend in common and I gave her a ring. That conversation, which lasted over 2 hours, covered off God, secular faith, I'm trying to think, secular faith, about why humour plays a part in putting the world to rights, and why I had to sack my first assistant director after 3 days because he insisted on calling me the little lady every time he picked up the megaphone. We made, I like that, go on. We made Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, her autobiographical novel, into a TV series the following summer. A writer who'd never written a TV script, a producer who'd never produced a TV program, and a director with 3 credits. Not one of them was TV. The BBC crew were on and off strike all summer, so our production was a little bit jagged. And although we had everything we needed, we did not have one thing extra. Every single prop, location, and even shot that we shot is in the final film. And when we showed the first episode to the channel controller, he stood up at the end and he said, "It's not very BBC, is it?" He left the room and we never saw him again. Mary Whitehouse showed a little more interest, trying her very best to get on Orange's band. You know, teenage lesbians making love, Pentecostals performing an exorcism on screen, and a 7-year-old in a lead role of a series that included talk of fornication, abhorrent sexual practices, and had the temerity to make fun of a pastor. It was literally more than she could bear. And it fell to me to defend what we had made, and beleaguered as I was by the outcry that she managed to get going around the series, I was actually more furious that Oranges was being characterized as relevant only to a specific sexuality in a fringe religious community. Not so. Jess was a role model for any young person who felt they didn't fit. In the nearly 30 years since Oranges was first shown, scores of men and women have written or told me that Oranges helped them come out to themselves, to their parents, to their communities. But hundreds have said it made them brave enough to do the thing they wanted, to be the person they wanted to be, creative rather than safe, move on rather than suffocate, be powerful rather than acquiesce. As a creator, in any medium, you are a role model. By the time I was in my early 30s, I was living and working in America. I'd just made a love story starring Marcello Mastroianni, Shirley MacLaine for 20th Century Fox, and they were both already in the 70s, and that was considered too late for love. But we made the love story nonetheless. But as was my habit, I was making a documentary while waiting for the go-ahead on my next movie. The documentary was about prostitution in New York. The film I was waiting to make was Tu Wong Fu, in which Wesley Snipes, Patrick Swayze would star with John Leguizamo as 3 drag queens who get stuck in Nebraska. The film was being produced by no less a figure than Steven Spielberg. So when I found out, to my surprise, I was pregnant, it was he I had to call. Almost immediately after he picked up the phone, there was an enormous crash. It turned out one of his children had been reaching to get a jar and pulled down jar, table, bench, everything on top of it. Stephen's slightly unbothered kids seemed quite a good segue for the conversation that I was trying to have. And his delight and congratulations did not quite appear to grasp my situation. I was pregnant and I could not get insurance to direct the film, a film that I'd worked on for many years and was patiently waiting to start. And Stephen was perplexed. He said, "I've made many films. I have many children. Surely there must be a way." My son was born on the last day of principal photography, actually, on the way home from the airport, as it turned out. And he has a credit on the film as best baby. And to his continued delight, he appears cross-referenced to Wesley Snipes on IMDb as having worked together. His credit and my directing was made possible by Stephen arranging my insurance cover on the basis that if anything happened to me, he would direct a film about 3 drag queens in Nebraska. 2 years later, when pregnant for the second time, I got a no-claims discount. And I happily directed a film that had a disproportionate number of scenes that had to be filmed in the sea. And at 7 months pregnant, every single production photo, encased in rubber, I looked like a boy in the landscape, waiting for a passing boat. I went into labour the day before I was scheduled to show the director's cut to the head of the studio. So at my behest, my assistant rang to ask that the screening move from Friday morning to the following Monday. The answer was no. The director's cut screening would happen with or without the director. I gave birth to my daughter on Friday a little after 4 a.m. At 10 a.m., I was in the screening, where the late, great John Barry's wife slow hand clapped the studio head in disgust. I received my notes. Not a word was said about the birth of my baby less than 6 hours earlier, and by 1 o'clock, I was back in my hospital bed. Now, I really have to be clear. I would not do that now. In fact, I would try and prevent another woman doing it. And very likely, I would either take to court or more probably punch the lights out of anyone who put a woman in that insidious position. But my daughter is 21. It was then, not now. And you could count the female directors across the globe on less than 2 hands. And of those, the mothers on less than half of one of these. And what I learned is it's not enough to have a voice. You must also have rights. And that those in charge do not always have our best interests in mind. And that women make their own history, but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under conditions of their own making, but under conditions that already exist and contain within them the force of history. So earlier I told a story of the company that willfully ignored the damage it was doing to thousands of children, of which I am one. So now I want to come full circle. A few years ago, I noticed that children had got quieter, and what was elsewhere, through their phones, seemed more interesting than what was in the room. I didn't have a particular agenda, I was just interested in what it meant, and I started to make a film, because that's what you do. A film that eventually took me from the bedrooms of English teenagers to the suburbs collectively known as Silicon Valley. And I was in New York filming one of the people who is credited with inventing the internet. And he said to me, the vision of the technology is that it would be democratizing, there would be no gatekeepers, and all people would be equal. And I thought, as good as that sounds, that is a category error. Because if all people are equal, are being treated equally, then de facto, a child is being treated as if they were an adult. And in that realization was the end of a career that had lasted remarkably 35 years as a film director. I tried to tell people, policymakers, members of the government, people at the tech companies, in business, third sector, but very few people were interested in my revelation that the digital environment had never been intended for children, and that the problems that were beginning to emerge were a direct result of the fact that the regulatory, legal, social norms of childhood were not being observed, creating the toxic mix of an immersive environment in which children were spending ever increasing parts of their lives, but in which the concept of childhood simply does not exist. No one, I can tell you this for nothing, likes global bad news. So when you have a film, as you know, you follow it around. And whether I was in Brazil, Holland, Germany, America, France, up and down the counties of England, Scotland, Wales, whenever the lights went up, my screenings were full of teachers. And the difference between a teacher and a parent is that a teacher sees hundreds of kids while a parent only sees 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. And the teachers thought there was something wrong. The teachers who came in droves asked me to go and speak in their schools, and I did. I did for months, all over the world. I talked to hundreds of children and thousands of children, probably. And we talked about bodies and sex and gender and bullying, about confidence and overexposure. We talked about what it was to be 11 and see something you cannot unsee, what it was to be 14 and say something you cannot eradicate. We talked about clouds and servers and about how social obligations are baked into the services to gather data. We talked about surveillance and privacy, about the pressure to be on, to be answering, the power of information, and about how devices are designed to be compulsive. And those hundreds of kids and me and some other people, some experts, even some hidden people in the very companies of the services that they have been using, wrote 5 rights. We wrote 5 rights framework, a framework that would transpose the rights of children to the digital environment. The right to remove what you yourself have put up. The right to know who, what, and why your data has been taken, shared, stored, and within that, the right to object. The right to safety and support in order to thrive, not just survive the digital environment. The right to conscious and informed use. That is, not having your behavior and choices dictated by sophisticated reward loops of persuasive technology, but instead be designed to promote and encourage intentional uses of technology. The right to digital literacy, which the kids absolutely do not mean more e-safety or adult-defined harms. What they mean is understanding the purposes of the technology, having skills to be creators as well as consumers, make meaningful choices, and having an age-appropriate understanding of social norms. Now, 5 rights has gone from strength to strength, and I'm actually going to encourage you to all visit our website and become signatories as individuals, as organizations, to actually download the Disrupted Childhood report we published a couple of weeks ago. Because what I wanted to say here now is to make a bigger point, which is while the digital environment was not and is not designed with children in mind, the answer is not to ban them or block them, not to take a censorious attitude towards time and content, not for you to all compete to gamify the things that you make. The point is to build a digital environment that does have them in mind, an environment that will inevitably be as complex and flawed as all the environments in which children grow up, but not one that has at first recklessly and now knowingly endangered children in pursuit of profit and then colludes with governments to cover it up. Here at the Children's Media Conference, you will have spent your days thinking about new formats, distribution systems, how to grab attention of children, how to stay relevant, maybe even how to stay in business. What I ask is that you add to those questions some others. Why, what, how, who with, and for whom. Everyone in this room is a role model. What you make, how you make it, who you involve, what the conditions are that you create for others, whom you listen to, and who you give way for. At the end of last year, 5 Rights ran a workshop with BT and asked 12 children aged between 9 and 13 to participate. Day 1, children chucked out every single thing that the 30 top designers at BT put to them. Day 2, the children patronizingly said it was a little better and might be of interest to their little brother. Day 3, they showed interest in one of the 3 remodeled proposals. The workshop was a wonderful success. The exhausted and terrified engineers, UX designers, head of IT, product development research were knocked out at how far they had to travel to meet the needs of children. And they were further amazed to realize how much time, money, and expert resources had been saved by the presence of 12 young children. But the last word goes to an 11-year-old girl who, before going home, wanted to thank us for the best 3 days of her life. And I asked why. And she said, because the adults actually listened. And when I laughed, she actually told me off quite sternly. And she said, no, adults don't listen to children. What they do is pretend they're listening, and then they say what they were going to say anyway. Or they don't hear us because they're too busy looking at their phone. What I have learned is, first, it's not enough to have a voice. We must have rights and fight for the rights of others who must also have a voice in determining their future. Second, those in charge do not always have our best interests in mind. And third, that it's not how to use a camera that's important, but what you use it for. Thank you.